them many ways. One of the things that is recorded for us in secular history is that he would erect the insignia of the Roman army in the temple. And as you can imagine, the Jews hated that. They were highly offended by those actions, and yet that's what he did. One time he went into the temple and he stole the treasury money. He stole some of the vessels that were holy and used for worshiping God, and he took the proceeds of those and he built an aqueduct to help further the civil organization. Pilate was no friend of the Jews. Once the Jews protested Pilate in what he was doing. And Pilate, instead of trying to disperse the crowd, he took some of his soldiers and had them dress up in civilian clothes and mingle among the crowd. And then as they were chanting and as they were protesting, they pulled their swords and stabbed them and killed the protesters. It was easier than disbanding them, see. There was another time in which Pilate killed some Samaritans on Mount Gerizim who were trying to worship according to their customs. And while none of these particular instances were what was happening in the days of Jesus, they were contemporary. And it just shows how the Romans did not get along with the Jews. Even though they were the oppressor, they were the ones who were putting terror in the hearts and the minds of the Jews, they were no friends of the Jews. And so certainly to show terror like that, to mix their blood with their own sacrifices as they were seeking to worship God, that's the kind of terror that the Jews lived under in the early part of the first century. Jesus, his point is clear, however. The natural reaction would be see such a tragedy as people being killed while they're worshiping God and think, well, God was not pleased with them, and so God had Pilate kill them, murder them, put them to death. And that because of their sins. And so Jesus says, do you suppose that these Galileans were worse sinners than other Galileans? That they were deserving of this kind of treatment? Is that what you were thinking? And then Jesus says, no, it wasn't that at all. Then he moves on to his second point. He identifies this tragedy. And in the aftermath of that tragedy and terror, he says, do you think that these on whom the Tower of Siloam fell, do you think they were worse offenders than any others in Jerusalem? No. And what's amazing is Jesus takes this focus upon the question of why. Why did Pilate slay these people? Why did the tower fall upon these of Jerusalem? Why did these things happen? And Jesus turns and he says, it's not a question of why these things happen. The real question is, were they ready for it to happen? And today, when we hear people talking about tragedy and terror and asking that question, we'll see that there's an answer to that question, but that's not even the right question to ask, is it? The right question is, am I ready for that moment? Warren Wiersbe once stated, he said, the question is not why did these people die, but what right do you have to live? You know, we expect to wake up in the morning because we think we deserve to live. Well, I'm good enough and I'm close enough to God and I deserve another day. And why should tragedy or why should terror, why should hate take my life and cut it short? Or if I've lived a long and full and healthy life, we still expect to live another day. And the question is why do you deserve to live another day? Is it because we are more righteous than anybody else? Is it because we are free from sin? Is it because God has promised us another day? And the answer is no. No, we are not deserving of another day. But what we have is an opportunity to get ready for the end of our lives. That's what God is giving to us. But in the aftermath of all of these tragedies, in our modern times, and I suspect too in ancient times as well, we see the face of God. And this is where our hearts are warmed, because we see the face of God. It is seen in those who ran into the face of danger, responding to the flight of strangers. They didn't know them. They were just going to help them. It is witnessed in the determination of those who lost arms and legs and are having to recuperate and learn how to dress themselves or learn how to walk again. God's hand is seen in over the hearts of those who have suffered such tragedy and lost loved ones and brothers in arms in tragic ways. He is seen in an outpouring of love and clothes and prayers and resources to assist victims who lost everything. We see the face of God. But why can we say that He's seen there? It's because nothing else explains the actions of those people except that they had an influence of God. Oh, but Sam, they may have been atheists. They may have been people who were secularists and not even worried about religion. That's true. They may have been atheists, but you know what they were influenced by? The power and love and leading of God. You see, the best the world can come up with is do no harm, right? Do no harm is the best they can do. We as Christians have do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The highest moral code, the highest ethical code that the world has ever known. But that's not what the world has. The world has come up with do no harm. And at its best, do no harm doesn't cause ordinary folks to run into the fire. At its best, do no harm doesn't direct people to put themselves in harm's way to help others that they do not know. Do no harm doesn't set the bomb, but do unto others sets to work after the bomb. And that's the power of God. If atheism can't save the world, and destroying everyone that sins doesn't save the world, here's the question that comes to each of us. What will save the planet? What is going to do it? And the answer is Christians. God's people. Us. Sitting here tonight, we are the ones that are going to save this planet. And I mean really save the planet. I'm not talking about saving ducks and rocks and baby seals, but we're talking about saving people. Who is going to save the people? And the answer is us. How are we going to do it? By being a Christian. Because it comes down to this. Why is there such tragedy in the world? Why is there hate that rains down terror and death upon innocents? Because our society has kicked God out. And that's why our world is lost. And the only way to save the world then is to put God back in. To put His influence here. Oh, I'm not saying that we necessarily are going to save the world by changing everyone's heart, although I would love to see that. But even the atheist that is influenced by the rules and the morality of God will hold himself back from such hate that brings death and destruction. You see, even the one who's an agnostic or the one who has no inkling, doesn't even want to think about God, if He's there or not, they don't care. They're just going to live their lives, but they are influenced by a society filled with righteousness. Even though they may not be saved, they are influenced in a good way to save the rest of us alive. How are we going to save the world? 3 things that I can give you tonight. We'll do them real quick. The first one is do unto others. Matthew 7 and verse 12. It's very easy. The golden rule sets the stage for that higher code of ethic. It is the standard of reciprocity that we will treat others how we want to be treated. I remember as a boy knowing very little Bible. And when I say very little, I knew very little. Almost none. But you know what I knew? I knew the golden rule. Now, mind you, I didn't know it as part of the Bible. I just knew it as the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so the way I looked at it in my warped, immature childhood view was, well, if He's going to do that to me, that must mean He wants me to do that back to Him. And so when my brother would pick on me, well, what that meant was he was saying, I want you to pick on me. And when someone called me a name, that was me thinking in my mind, oh, they must want me to call them a name. And so I warped and I twisted and I turned the golden rule into something that was anathema to God. You see, I wanted to show the same contempt and rudeness that someone showed to me, because after all, do unto others, that's how they've done to me, and so that's what I'm going to do back to them. No. You want to act like you want to treat people how you want to be treated. Well, if he's going to treat me this way, then he must be saying he wants me to treat him the same way. And yet that is nowhere close to what Jesus gives. Jesus is not advocating a vengeance style ethic. Rather, when we are slighted, what he is telling us is that we are to respond in a way that we would like to be treated when we are offended by someone. Think about offense. Oftentimes, when we are offended by someone, we seek vengeance. And the problem is we seek vengeance most often from only part of the story. The Paul Harvey can tell you the rest of the story, but the real fact is we usually don't know the whole story at all. And what we like to do is when we get a little piece of it, when we are incensed by what has happened, we're ready to take vengeance in that moment. But think about it. If we are wronged, truly wronged, the best thing we can do is return good for evil, isn't it? We think about Proverbs 25, beginning in verse 21, when he said, if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. And if he is thirsty, give him water to drink, for you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Isn't it worth returning kindness for evil to be rewarded by God? Paul himself takes that passage from Proverbs and he writes it again or quotes it again for us in Romans chapter 12 and verse 20, that it is better to return good for evil. But what if it turns out we were not wronged and we went ahead and took our pound of flesh? We demanded the rights of vengeance, and then it turns out that we were not wronged after all. We have just treated an innocent person with such vitriol that we have become the bad person. And then finally we remember this, that God reserves the right of vengeance, doesn't he? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Right, Hebrews 12. And so we respect God's right to claim. Why? Because he alone is perfectly holy. He alone is complete in his knowledge to know the whole story and to punish properly. The righteousness of God reminds us that he is going to deal with evil and sin and wickedness, crimes against his people, crimes against his creation. God alone knows the whole story, and he will act accordingly. Sometimes people corrupt this golden rule by saying, do unto others before they do unto you. You get that pound of flesh before anyone else. But here again, in our limited knowledge and our imperfect justice system often distorts truth or even fills the unknown by projecting our own probable actions upon others. Well, I know what he's going to do because that's what I would do in that situation. Fortunately, not everyone is as evil as me. Fortunately, there are some who hold themselves back, and so we cannot just project how we would react in certain situations on others. There are some things about Jesus that we cannot mimic. For example, in John chapter 2, he says he needed no one to bear witness unto him, for he himself knew what was in man. That's something I can't do. I don't know the hearts of men. I do not know what is in man, and so I must rely on what actually happens. Number two, if the first principle is that we are going to follow the golden rule to save the planet is to treat others how you want to be treated, the second principle is to put the welfare of others before yourselves. Christianity is an unselfish life. It is not motivated by what others can do for us, but what we can do for others. Jesus himself said, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or the rich neighbors, lest they invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Luke chapter 14, verses 22 and 23. You know, it was in 1986 that Janet Jackson asked, "What have you done for me lately?" But she's reflecting a mentality that operates in the world day in and day out. What have you done for me? We like to keep a record of benefits toward us from other people, measuring other people's worth and what they have done for me by the benefits that they have demonstrated toward me. But Christ is challenging us all along to forget the track record and instead look out for one another, regardless of the benefits that they can bestow upon us. Notice Paul's admonition in Philippians 2 and verse 4 when he says, "Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others." We are supposed to be people concerned about the welfare of others, putting it even ahead of ourselves. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbors. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 24. If we make Christ the center of our world, and that's what Christian transformation is about putting Christ at the center of our world and not ourselves, which is our natural tendency, then we can see the needs of others. So we need to be aware of where we put our focus. Is it on Christ? It needs to be on Him and on helping those who are His. Look at the pictures and the videos of tragedies like Las Vegas, like Harvey, like the hurricanes, like New York. And look what's happening. There are people who are putting others ahead of themselves. They're running into burning buildings. They're running into falling buildings. They're wading out into water that is swift and could sweep them away to rescue a person or a dog that's sitting on the top of a pickup truck. Even in the shootings in Las Vegas, when no one knew what was happening, go back and look at some of the video footage, which is just, it's terrible, it's horrific to see them. But when the shots start firing, notice how many push someone near them that they love, maybe even a stranger, down on the ground and cover them over. That's not do no harm. That's do unto others. That's putting the welfare of someone else even above my own physical welfare. That's what happens in these events. Then realize every day is a tragic event. I know we don't like to think about it, but you remember Paul said that we're putting on the gospel armor that we may be able to stand or withstand in the evil day. Have you ever thought about why he calls today and tomorrow and the next day the evil day? The tragic events of those outside of Christ that are dying all around us. That's the tragedy. That's the terror of it all. And when we realize that our Master has sent us into the maw of evil, the catastrophe and the tragedy, He has sent us into it to help others. Millions are groping without the gospel, right? We sing in the song. Swiftly returning life's daily pages. He says millions are groping without the gospel. And may the hand that they finally grasp be yours. To give them hope. To put their spiritual welfare first. That's how we're going to save the planet. And then finally, through love. Because there's no greater love than to lay down your life for your friend. That's the final principle. Love is willing to lay down life for someone, for anyone else. You know, this is the essence of what Jesus did. We know that. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. John 10, 17 and 18. That's the love that compelled him to lay down his life. In fact, that demonstration of love is for everyone. From the most pious person to the most scandalous degenerate, Jesus died for the whole world. Paul described it like this: for one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person, one would even dare to die. But God shows his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5, 7, and 8. This is how we continue to demonstrate a desire to save the world, by being willing to lay down our lives so others may be saved. It's the height of love. Jesus said, "Greater love has no man than this." This is it. This is the pinnacle, the apex, the highest point. It doesn't get better than this. Well, what's that? That someone laid down his life for his friends. John 15:13. Willing to lay down in order for others to be saved. Paul shared the same sentiment when he said, "For I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brother, my kinsman, according to the flesh." He said, if I could do it, if I could die, and all of my Jewish relatives could be saved, I would die today. If I could allow myself to die right now and know that Gentile friends would be saved, I would lay down my life that they might be saved. What are you willing to give up so that others might be saved? What's worth it? Our towns and our cities are filled with those who are willing to put their lives at risk in an attempt to save others, some that they know and some that they don't know. Even as the rains fell and the floods rose, they searched for people to save. And while the bullets were still flying and ringing past their ears, some rushed in to save those people in the streets of Las Vegas. And here's what we know, that hell's fire burns throughout this world. And as it rages like the sin rages like an inferno around us, the question is will we be willing to snatch them out of the fire? Are we willing to save lives, put ourselves on the line to rescue the perishing? Look, terror and tragedy will always be with us. The question is not why. The question is, are you ready? Jesus would say, "No, but I tell you, except you repent, you will all likewise perish." Death comes to us, we understand that. The planet continues to die from evil and its creeping pace of time itself. It brings life to an end, but we don't need Captain Planet or green alternatives to save it. The only way we're going to save the world is through the influence of Christians. It's through our hands and our hearts, willing to do unto others and look out for the interest of others and love people that we are willing to lay down our lives for. That's the only way the world is going to be saved. And so we look at tragedy all around us, and we see the greatest tragedy is people marching to the grave unprepared. Let us heed the Master's call to rush in when the world is rushing out. And it begins with answering the call of salvation that he gives to each one of us, the opportunity to have our sins removed, to build a relationship with him, to know his righteousness, to know his love, and to know with certainty that heaven is our home. And if you're unsure about that, would you let go of your doubt? Would you let go of your pride and come before him in humble submission? Seek his salvation tonight while we stand and while we sing.